Well, thank you everyone for coming today. It is 12:01, so we will get started with our very first Real Talk presentation. And so thank you for coming out. This is the second speaker series that GAP will be offering. So our first one is the Building Community Compassion series that launched last October and has been running every month with a new speaker and a new topic. And this is our very first youth-focused, a young adult-focused speaker series presentation. This is in partnership with the Canadian Mental Health Association, and our two speakers today both come from the Canadian Mental Health Association. So thank you for joining us for Real Talk. Let's begin by respectfully acknowledging we are zooming in from the region of Muskoka, which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe. Gravenhurst Against Poverty commits to not only acknowledging this, but to also learn and educate ourselves to create opportunity and honor sacred spaces. We commit to taking action towards the support and commitment to walking the path together in respect, peace, and harmony for our future generations. So it looks like we are getting a few attendees just logging in. Today we have with us Cassie and Brittany from the Canadian Mental Health Association working in the youth program on the addiction side of CMHA. So a different lens than our last speaker, who was from the mental health crisis sector. And so Brittany, did you want to introduce yourself? You're muted.
It's great. We're getting off a good start. Hi, everyone. My name is Brittany Dean, and I work at the Canadian Mental Health Association in the Youth Addiction Service area. I am joined by Cassie, who, I don't know, Cassie, if you want to introduce yourself. Nope. Okay. Joined by Cassie McMullen. And so she'll be speaking later. And today we're going to talk about marijuana and cannabis and what we call the blunt truth. So our goal today is to talk about how cannabis has changed and how the effects of cannabis has changed. We're going to discuss the different strands regarding cannabis and how different chemical components can cause certain impacts, as well as how it can affect youth specifically. So we're going to talk about addiction as well and how safer use of cannabis. So
it's also important to acknowledge that there is a chat box and there's also a question and answer space. So please feel free. It is anonymous, so we are recording the live presentation. However, your name will not be recorded. And so if you have a question, put it in the Q&A or in the chat, and I will read it out loud without your name being mentioned for confidentiality.
Also, I was going to say something else, Des. Oh, shoot. What was I going to say? We've sort of divided it into two parts. So there's two sections where we're going to answer some questions. So if you want to just throw them in there, we'll have two separate areas where we can answer your questions. I don't know. Cass has control of the slides. So if you want to.
Cassie, oh, there you go.
Oh, there we go. I think maybe it was just delay and what's the word I'm looking for? Okay. So what is the big deal when it comes to cannabis? So it was legalized October 17th, 2018. And so with that came the fact that adults, so 19 years of age or older, are able to possess up to 30 grams of legal dried cannabis. You can buy it from provincial or territory realtors. You can grow up to 4 plants per residence for personal use. Recently, edibles also became legal as well. So in terms of those, you're allowed to have up to 10 milligrams of THC in a single package of an edible. We're going to talk more about what edibles are later. So if it's so bad for you, why did they make it legal? So the number one reason is so that they could put regulations in place to minimize potential harm. So for instance, if you're buying illegal drugs off the street, you don't know what's in them exactly. So this is a way for the Canadian government to be able to regulate what you are getting, how much THC you're getting, how much CBD you're getting. We'll also get into what those words mean later. Yeah, so it is also legal, obviously, just like any other substance, for adults to provide or sell cannabis to youth, and they'll face criminal charges up to 14 years in jail for doing so. So again, it's a plant, it's natural, can't be that bad for you. So just because it is a plant does not mean that it's not bad for you still. The weed that we get nowadays, like the cannabis we get now, it's not necessarily grown in the wild. So it's been modified for specific drug use. And it also, the cannabis plant also has other uses such as hemp, which you can make fabric out of and jewelry and things like that. People have been smoking weed for years. My grandparents, my parents smoked it, the 60s and 70s. It was all about marijuana. Well, that's true. However, the levels of THC in the marijuana then was a lot less than it is now. So again, just as our perspectives and our knowledge of cannabis has changed, so has our ability to modify it and manipulate it. So we're able to add things to it. We're able to take things out of it. So just in general, it's changed a lot since the 60s and 70s. So we're going to take a closer look at what cannabis is. So cannabis, it's a hallucinogen. So these drugs are generalized disruptions in the brain, especially in perception, cognition, and mood. The active chemical components are, there's more than 80 different ones, but THC and CBD are the most well-known. So THC is the main psychoactive component in cannabis. So that means that it's responsible for giving you that high that you get when you use cannabis, whereas CBD is the non-intoxicating form. So you don't really get that high. It's most used for medical purposes. It can help reduce inflammation, pain, nausea, seizures, anxiety, that type of thing. So there's a lot of other forms found in cannabis, but THC and CBD are the most common and ones that we talk about regularly. Okay, so how do you understand the different types of cannabis? There's a number of different varieties of cannabis, or strands, as we like to call them. The two most common ones are indica and stevia. I never say it right. It's a problem. Stevias are strands. They're more like cerebral, so energizing, stimulating, whereas indicas are more used for sedating and relaxation effects. But a lot of the times there are strands that are hybrids. So they've used both of those strands and combined them to sort of give you both of those effects, and it's going to affect everybody differently. So these categories are now actually being seen as simply the chemical compound and processes at work. So focus has shifted to how specific molecules can create intended effects. So for instance, molecules such as flavonoids, which cause the flavor of cannabis, or terpenoids, which are the aroma of cannabis. So different strands, different things can make them smell and taste differently while you're using it. Okay, so methods of use. There's lots of different ways you can use cannabis. The first one is obviously the one where you're rolling it into cigarette or cigar paper or using a pipe, so you're smoking it. That has been the most common for years. In Muskoka, we have a lot of people using what we call like a water pipe, so a bong, and youth tend to mix it with tobacco with their weeds. So this is called a popper, very common in our community. Yeah. The next would be cannabis resin. So any or other cannabis extracts, so they can use them for vaping. Shatter and dab are examples of this. So it's when you get concentrated levels of THC and it's consumed by heating and inhaling the smoke or vapor. So you see this a lot with vaping as well. And the last one is through edibles. So cannabis can be brewed as tea, infused into drinks, or mixed with food and ingested. we're going to talk a little bit more about edibles and what they are. So edibles are any kind of food or drink that has been infused with the cannabis extract of THC and CBD. Their active ingredients in edible cannabis products are absorbed through the body through your digestive tract. So it's going to take a lot longer for your body to feel the effects because it has to enter the bloodstream, it has to go through your liver, be metabolized, and then it's released back into your bloodstream, and there it can go to the brain, your central nervous system, all of that. So because of that huge process, it's going to take a lot longer for your body to feel the onset of those effects. As well, it's going to take, those effects are going to last a lot longer because of that. So that's the main difference between edibles and other types of cannabis, is that you're not inhaling it, you're digesting it. So when you inhale cannabis through smoking or through bongs, it's going to happen immediately, the effect within minutes, because you're getting that process through your lungs, not your digestive system. So also, the effects are going to be different too. Like if the intensity and longevity of the effects can depend on your weight, your sex, how much food you've eaten that day, how quickly your body metabolizes things. So it's going to change depending on who you are, which is the same for any and all drugs. So effects of cannabis, there's lots of them. You can have euphoria, heightened sensory perception, elation, appetite stimulation, feelings of panic or fear, trouble concentrating, decreased coordination, decreased interest in completing tasks, and then some physical symptoms such as nausea, vomiting, dizziness, drowsiness, dry mouth, increased blood pressure, increased heart rate, and you could have heart palpitations as well. And like I said earlier, it's going to depend a lot on your body and that type of thing, as well as like how often you use cannabis, how long it's been since you last used, the strand of cannabis you're using, how much THC is in there, how much CBD is in there, and how you're using it. So are you eating it or are you inhaling it? Either one of those. Okay, so symptoms tend to reach their max within the 2 hours, but might last up to 8 hours depending on how much you've smoked. Effects from effects from edible cannabis can obviously last longer. So it's going to take you longer to get those effects, and they're going to last longer. They can last up to 24 hours. Long-term impacts are psychological dependence, extreme mood swings, flashbacks, or disturbing perceptions. So just to get into that a little bit more, psychological dependence is when a person is emotionally tied to a drug based on a mental desire for it. So the myth that psychological dependence is completely separate from physical dependence and that it's not as severe. So common symptoms of this are strong urges and cravings, any kind of anxiety, depression, mood swings when you're not using, irritability and restlessness, and sleep and appetite changes. So physical dependence refers to withdrawal that your body is experiencing when the substance is no longer there. So examples of this could be vomiting, nausea, diarrhea, seizures, that sort of thing. However, when the body may not directly react to the absence of cannabis, your brain does. So that's going to in turn impact your psychological behaviors like sleep and appetite, that sort of thing. And any like physical aspects of anxiety and depression that you have as well, such as like the upset stomach, sweats, that sort of thing, shaking, all of those things. So what about addiction? So a lot of people believe that cannabis is not addictive, and it's a misconception. So cannabis use disorder is recognized in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders in the 5th edition. Tolerance, dependence, and withdrawal can occur with regular use of cannabis. So addiction, it equals the process of, the loss of personal control. It's an inability to cut down or stop despite negative impacts on your lifestyle. So those negative impacts can be damage or breakdown to family or social relationships, loss of interest and withdrawal from previously enjoyed activities and responsibilities, trouble with the law, negative health implications, and you're still continuing to use, even though you're experiencing those things. So while cannabis doesn't induce withdrawal symptoms as severe as other drugs like alcohol or cocaine or heroin or things like that, it does occur, as we talked about in the last slide. So your body becomes tolerant or used to cannabis, and the effects diminish over time. So meaning you're going to have to increase the frequency or amount of use, which can lead to negative impacts. And a lot of people report not feeling as high as they used to, and they just continue to use so that they can feel normal. So this is what tolerance and dependence means, is that your body is becoming tolerant of the drug and is becoming dependent upon it because of those THC levels. So cannabis acts on the reward circuit of the brain, so the same as other drugs. And so that's basically your brain is wired to make sure that you will repeat healthy activities. So like eating, connecting these activities while feeling good. So it teaches us to do it again and again without sort of thinking about it. And that can lead to addiction to other factors presented. And we're going to talk more about that. So not everyone who uses cannabis will get addicted. Why? Addiction is heavily influenced by life circumstances of people using the drug and the reasons why they're using it in the first place. So biology can play a part, but environmental risks and protective factors are really strong indicators. So psychological factors that can come into play, such as stress, personality traits like high impulsivity and sensation seeking, any kind of history of depression or anxiety, eating disorders, many other psychiatric disorders can also be a risk factor for using. Environmental influences that can be risk factors could be exposure to any kind of physical, sexual, emotional abuse or trauma from the past, substance use or addiction within the family in general, access to the addictive substance. So if they've got readily access and it's a normal occurrence in their life, they're more liable to use it. Exposure to popular cultural references that encourage substance use. It's sort of everywhere in our world right now. So just exposure to that. Starting alcohol, nicotine, or other drug use at an early age can impact if they're going to use this substance or other substances, as well as genetics. So having one or more of these risk factors doesn't mean that you're definitely going to develop an addiction, but it definitely means that your odds are a lot greater. So just being aware of that. I think we're on the recap. So this isn't a recap of the whole thing, just this section, and then we can get to questions if there are any. So if you do have a questions, just start piling them into that chat box. So again, cannabis became legal October 17th, 2018. The danger of buying and using illegal drugs is that we can never know for sure what's exactly in it. So this way we are able to regulate what is in the drug that you're buying. THC is the compound most responsible for giving you the high feeling, whereas CBD is mostly used for medical purposes. There's numerous ways to use it, poppers being a really popular way in Muskoka. And again, that's when you're mixing the tobacco and the weed together. And edibles are a way to ingest cannabis via your food and your drinks, and they take longer to digest, and the effects are longer as well. Cannabis effects, again, remember that they're different for everybody. So you can have euphoria, appetite stimulation, trouble concentrating, dry mouth, increased heart rate, and all of those other effects I had talked about earlier. But it's going to depend on your body and how well you metabolize things, what those effects happen, how they affect you. Long-term impacts of use are psychological dependence, extreme mood swings, flashbacks, or disturbing perceptions. So, and then addiction, again, is heavily influenced by life circumstances of the people using the drug and the reasons why they're using it and what they're getting from it. So if there are any questions, I'm going to look. I don't think that there was when I checked. Nope. Okay. Cass, do you want to take over?
Yeah.
Alrighty, I'm gonna turn my camera on.
Had to stop it there so I could unmute myself. So I'll pick back up where we were. Hope that it works again. All right.
You're good. It's working.
Perfect. Okay. So, I mean, a big part of these presentations and specifically the link between youth and cannabis, but we're trying to understand youth and maybe support them in the decisions that they're making. So why do they use cannabis is a big question. And one that if we had some youth on here, and I'm not sure if we do, we could ask them to maybe give us their reasoning behind it, why they think they use or their peers use it, or maybe why they themselves have chosen to use it. But we know from both research and experience working as youth addiction counselors that experimentation is a huge reason that a lot of people use or try cannabis. It doesn't necessarily lead to high risk use, but youth are in a stage of exploration and testing limits, and experimenting with drugs unfortunately often goes along with that. So research does show that by late high school, many adolescents have at least tried cannabis and alcohol, especially. Those are kind of the top two that they've at least tried at some point. One of the main reasons that youth identify themselves as the purpose of their use is to relax and enhance the enjoyment of their recreation time. So they, just like adults, do have some stress in their lives. Sometimes we forget, I think, because it's different than what, the daily stresses that we're going through. But there's a lot of pressure for them to perform at school, a lot of pressure to fit in, figure out their lives. They might have a part-time job and be trying to navigate, balancing that with relationships, friendships, as well as schoolwork. So they do have a lot going on, and they're going through a lot of changes. And so they need, some outlets to kind of unwind and feel good. So they often, use together in social settings. A lot of people say they use it because it makes things more enjoyable. Like they'll watch a movie and the movie will be better. Whether it's funnier or it's more interesting, it does kind of have that enhancing effect. So youth do identify that as a major reason for wanting to use. And again, it's important to point out that type of use doesn't always lead to problem use. A lot of people can use it recreationally, just on the weekends, or once a month when they don't have work or school or other responsibilities, and use it responsibly to do exactly that, to relax and enjoy themselves. However, when it's a fine line between using that to kind of enhance and as an extra to those recreational activities, and then using it as a pure coping strategy, right? So when it becomes kind of the only thing that the youth is using to deal with the stress that's in their life, and maybe, some more traumatic type of experiences, then it starts becoming more risky in terms of whether it will lead to problem use or not. So we do hear that quite often as well, as counselors, that youth are using it to self-medicate and to cope with kind of their day-to-day situations that they're unhappy about and really don't have a lot of control over. So that's I think a huge piece of also being a youth is they are in that transition period of not being a child and having no control, but they're not quite yet able to be on their own and make their own decisions. So if they are in situations that family situations or home situations that are not helpful for them or healthy for them, they don't always have the choice to leave or anywhere else to go. So, they might turn to cannabis as a way to get through what they have to live with right now. The self-medicating part, I do like to point out, because we hear a lot that youth use it as a way to deal with anxiety, especially in social situations. It makes them feel like they can relax a little bit more. Their mind maybe isn't racing as much, doesn't make them as self-conscious. It gives that euphoric feeling where, they're able to laugh and kind of let loose, which they might not be able to do otherwise. And while it does seem to help, in those moments, over time, using cannabis that way, if you already got anxiety and you're kind of using it to medicate that, it's actually going to make your anxiety a lot worse. So that is something that we now know, and a lot of youth, I think, still maybe misunderstand. I think the information is getting better, but especially when medicinal cannabis came out, a lot of people thought, oh, that's a great way to deal with my anxiety. I can, use it medically, but that's not really what they prescribe it for, or not very commonly. And even in those cases, it is used in adults. It's not used for youth. And we'll talk about some of the reasons for that in a little bit, but there are some major differences in young people versus those over 25. I think I covered that one. And then the last one that, I would say I don't hear this one a ton. I think they definitely play a role, peer use in normalization. So how normal is cannabis use in the social circles that they're in? How normal is it at home? We know that some parents or guardians or brothers or sisters, also use cannabis. And if that's something that the youth is growing up seeing, it becomes normal. It's a part of everyday life. It's something that people do, just like alcohol use, right? We see families over time using it at Christmas or at birthdays or celebrations, and so that's acceptable. And so if it's seen in those ways, then often youth might use it, as we talked about earlier, recreationally. But if it's seen being more of a regular, everyday thing, then they're more likely to also to adopt that viewpoint of it. I wouldn't say that people ever really feel like peer pressure is a reason that they use cannabis or identify that. Certainly, again, when everyone around you is using, you're going to feel more compelled maybe to try it, to do that experimenting, to use it to have fun with everyone else who seems to be doing it, but not necessarily like the peer pressure that kind of used to be believed was happening, like, people actually forcing it on you or making you feel bad if you didn't do it, or it doesn't seem to be as common as a reason these days. So as I mentioned, there are some differences obviously between those under 25 and youth specifically, and those over. So the brain is a big part of that. It's still developing in these years, and lots of important changes are happening. So the first part I like to point out here is in the adolescent brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is your kind of your voice of reason, your logical thought, the part that's a little bit more developed and able to evaluate things and really problem solve and be, like I said, be rational, like not just act on emotion. it's not working as strongly right now. So the other parts of the brain that have that emphasis on emotion and excitement, like chasing, more adrenaline fueling activities and having short-term rewards. So like feeling good in the moment instead of worrying about like delaying gratification. So I know if I study for my test, I'm going to feel really good when I get an A in 2 weeks or whatever. I'm able to see that long-term reward of doing what I need to do now. The brain is not fully developed enough to completely function that way. So adolescents have a hard time controlling themselves because they want to do something that's going to make them feel good right now. So I could study, or I know I could go hang out with my friend, and that's going to make me feel awesome right now because that's what I want to do. And, they're going to go do really fun stuff. So it can be very difficult for youth to choose between the short-term and the long-term rewards. Not only that, they actually experience more intense sensations of pleasure from enjoyable activities and experience negative emotions in the same way. It's more deeply felt, more loudly. I think, that is something that is often portrayed in the media or parents talk about, or communities that, that youth can be very emotional or kind of have mood swings. And it is actually shown that their brain is feeling things more intensely than an adult would experience them. So those types of behaviors or experiences make sense in that context. And due to that, they're obviously more sensitive to the effects of drugs, cannabis included. So you become more vulnerable, more likely to develop addiction if you're feeling those effects more strongly and you're enjoying them more than an adult brain would. The other piece of that is that, as mentioned in the previous slide about youth using it to like self-medicate or cope, and then having this inability to always wait for the long-term reward and not, and delay gratification, is that their negative feelings, because they're so strong, it's really hard for them to understand that it's going to end, that things are going to get better or are able to get better, in the long term, and this isn't going to last forever. So they're more likely to find a way to make it go away immediately. So that can also lead to kind of developing substance use or cannabis use specifically as a coping strategy. Okay, your brain on drugs. Using alcohol or other drugs during adolescence disrupts the healthy development of the brain. As I was just mentioning, there's still a lot of development and growth happening during the teenage years and into the 20s. They say about to 25-ish. Necessary connections for memory, attention, and other executive function skills, so that higher order thinking, which helps to regulate information flows, create priorities, and keep our whole brain and body system running. So it really is something that takes time to develop. These aren't things that, it's unfortunate because we often ask teenagers to do these things and then become annoyed or disappointed when they can't reach our expectations, but sometimes they just aren't able, their brains are not there yet. They're not able to always, judge things the same way that we would problem solve, create those priorities, like what should I do first? I've got 5 assignments due. Some of them are due next week. Some of them are due tomorrow. if we had tasks at work, we'd probably likely go to what needs to be done most urgently. Sometimes, you see teams do, well, what do I feel like doing the most? Or what am I going to enjoy the most? I'm going to do my English project first because I know I like it, even though my science lab is due, in 2 days. So they don't necessarily have those functional skills yet. And cannabis has been shown to kind of impact those developing areas. So with regular use of cannabis, the development and growth of the brain can be slowed and may lead to lower level of functioning, which again is the area that is responsible for controlling impulses, judging how or when to make a decision, paying attention, and concentrating on things, etc. We don't know. I don't think we have conclusive enough evidence around who this will happen to and who it won't, and will it be permanent or not. Some people seem to have periods of regular use as youth, and then are able to at some point quit, and their brains can, kind of catch up and develop when they're a little bit older. Other times that doesn't seem to be the case. So I think, there's still a lot we don't know, and it does affect every individual differently. So that kind of leads into our harm reduction talk later, but we know that regular use is definitely connected with affected brain development. So it's always something to be aware of. So will these brain changes actually impact my life? I feel like a lot of times, especially when we're using these kinds of words like higher order functioning or executive functioning in the brain, the frontal lobe, prefrontal cortex, all of that kind of lingo, youth are kind of missing, well, what does that actually mean, right? You're throwing all these words at me and like, how is that actually going to impact my future? We know that there is connections between regular cannabis use and lower school performance and educational achievement. So you're more likely to, maybe not complete high school or drop out if you're a regular heavy cannabis user. This can play into adulthood, where you end up with a lower income job, maybe an inability to get a job because of lack of, educational achievement. We know having your high school diploma at this point is very important. So if you're unable to achieve that, then obviously that's going to impact your career options. Risky decision making. So even things that could be happening day to day, am I more likely to get in a car with someone who's been drinking because I'm unable to really fully evaluate the situation because I'm using cannabis regularly? Or am I more likely to do other activities that are going to get me hurt? Or maybe smoking weed at school, which can be linked to a couple of the impacts there, where, again, I'm not necessarily evaluating the full consequences of what could happen. I could be kicked out of school. I could be charged. Maybe, maybe my parents are going to be upset and kick me out. I'm not really able to think through that decision fully, and so I'm more likely to act on impulse. Lower life satisfaction. That's linked a lot to the things that I've kind of already mentioned, like you're more likely to have a lower school performance or educational achievement, which impacts your income and career options. It is linked to some anxiety and depression, because your motivation is also impacted when you use cannabis. So you're often more likely to kind of withdraw from activities and from people in the long term. Even if it was a social thing to begin with, it becomes less about that connection and socializing, and more something you might do alone, or even when you're with people, you're not really connecting with them anymore. And which links with the kind of the last point there is relationship problems. So as I just mentioned, in terms of like friendships or companionship, but also in terms of like partner relationships. So boyfriends or girlfriends, you know, that if you're devoting all your time to smoking weed or getting weed, that's obviously going to have an impact on how people want to be in your life, and same with family members. So you're obviously going to have, you know, less satisfaction with where your life is at if, you know, you've lost some connections and you're not able to maybe reach the goals that other people have, or you watch everyone move forward in life and you're kind of still stuck. And I think a lot of people do describe themselves as feeling stuck as they get a little bit older and realize that maybe using cannabis for, you know, since they were 13 years old and now they're 20 has changed their trajectory a bit. Okay, so cannabis and mental health is also a very big and important topic. We know individuals who have mental health problems are already more likely to use cannabis regularly. As I mentioned before, that it might have something to do with that idea of like self-medicating or coping. I don't know that is that correlation has been fully proven, but research has shown that regular cannabis use is at least twice as common among individuals with mental disorders, including schizophrenia, bipolar disorders, depressive and anxiety disorders, and post-traumatic stress disorder. So we do know that there is a link there. Chronic cannabis use increases risk of developing psychosis and schizophrenia among individuals with a family history of these conditions. Again, this is something that I think I know in my own work, and in the research that I have read, is increasing in how often it's being seen in the community. There are a lot more youth developing some form of psychosis, whether that's where that's coming from. I mean, that's still to be seen. I would argue it probably has something to do with how high the level of THC content is in a lot of the products that are being used these days. Maybe there is a higher incidence of, of mental health problems among this generation. Not sure, because that does increase the likelihood of psychosis, but there is a risk of developing psychosis or schizophrenia, even if you don't have a family history. So if you're using it regularly, if you're using it heavily, especially if you start early, so, and when we say early, like 12, that puts you at a very high risk for developing some level of psychosis. And I think it's important to know that psychosis can be kind of a spectrum, right? The symptoms are not always quite as severe as like you might think. So a lot of times when we say like psychosis, people are imagine something, right? Something comes to mind as, a psychotic individual, this is what they look like, or this is what they do. Like they, maybe say things that don't make sense. Maybe they're talking to voices that no one else can hear. They have weird associations and beliefs about the world. But a lot of people even note what we would describe as dissociation. So not feeling like themselves, or, not being able to feel connected to the world anymore. And those are, albeit extremely less severe symptoms. Those are kind of early or less intense symptoms of psychosis, of feeling like you're not yourself. And that can kind of be a warning sign. And a lot of people experience that. So I think it's important to understand that full spectrum of what psychotic symptoms can look like, and how they are more common than maybe people like to believe, in people in youth, especially who have used cannabis. So our agency and most addiction services these days use a harm reduction approach. So harm reduction is a set of strategies and ideas aimed at reducing negative consequences associated with an activity or behavior. So harm reduction does not encourage or say it is okay to use drugs. Rather, it is an acknowledgement of the existence of drug use and puts people's well-being before judgment. So I would say, especially, kind of in the youth world, we are not there to tell them, what to do. That's often, they get enough of that from teachers and from parents of, they have those rules all the time. And so it's really giving them information to make their own choices. They are going to be adults, depending on where they fall in the youth spectrum, some sooner than others, but those choices are going to be more available to them around drug use. So we want to arm them with information that they can use. If they decide they do want to experiment, okay, how can we do that in a safe way? I'm going to attempt to play this video. It's a very brief one, but we'll just see if it works. I don't know if, Des, you can just let me know if it doesn't pop up, maybe.
Cass, we noted last time you had to click out of the PowerPoint to play through, YouTube or whatever the video is playing through.
Okay. Okay, so maybe we will leave it and try it at the end, because I've already had a tricky time getting this to work. So yeah, we'll leave it. Oh, now it's playing.
Most people believe cannabis is safe, but there are specific risks for people under age 25. Here are 5 reasons young people should try to delay cannabis use as long as possible. First, our brains are not fully developed until around age 25.
Okay. Yeah, we'll try it at the end, and just get through the rest of this first, because it's a bit of a summary of the things that we're going to talk about. So harm reduction strategies related to cannabis use. Delay use as long as you can. As they say, until 25, as we've mentioned, the brain's still developing until 25. Again, we want to be realistic. We know what the statistics tell us in terms of who's using it, at what age. If you can try and wait until you're 16, that already decreases a lot of your risk. So giving, at least that amount of time, yeah, it definitely has been shown to decrease risks associated with brain development and mental health problems. Avoid using cannabis if you plan on driving. We know that youth driving under the influence of cannabis is it's pretty regular, and I'm sure it is among adults as well. But there has been quite a focus on youth and driving and cannabis. And it can cause accidents, and it does. Sometimes youth often feel like they can concentrate better when they're high and driving, and that's kind of your brain's kind of playing a trick on you there, right? Like you might become hyper focused on something, but that means that you're ignoring all the surroundings. And when you're driving, you need to be aware of everything that's happening around you, constantly scanning for risks and dangers. So yeah, I think they say to wait 6 hours if you can between using cannabis and driving. Avoid using cannabis and alcohol or any other drug at the same time. So that's often another very common pattern that among youth, especially at a party or group gatherings where maybe you're a regular cannabis user and then you go to a party and you drink alcohol. So now you're using both at the same time, or maybe you feel like you're gonna have a big night out and you want to use both. It can have pretty extreme consequences in terms of like your physical health. Immediately being sick, a lot of people become ill from using both, but obviously can lead to other issues as well. Things that we're just talking about, like you're more likely to take risks, maybe be more likely to be taken advantage of by other people if you're so intoxicated that you aren't coherent anymore. Yeah, we don't know exactly how they act on each other, but it doesn't increase the effects of one or the other. It kind of creates a whole new effect. And you don't know how hard that's going to hit you. Avoid regular or frequent. So when we say frequent, I'm saying daily or near daily use. If you are currently using often, trying to limit your use. So maybe trying to cut back to just on the weekends, or, I'm going to just use on the weekends and once during the week. Yeah, trying to use a little bit less. Avoiding deep inhalation or holding your breath after inhaling. I know this is very popular, especially I think now with vaping too. They do the same thing where they inhale very deeply and hold it. And a lot of people kind of, post videos or put on social media of their ability to do this. It does cause the high and the effects to be a lot stronger. And obviously that's going to have a greater impact then on your brain and on your lungs and your body, right? Avoid using large amounts of cannabis or cannabis with a high potency. So trying to look for things that have less than 10% THC. And this is kind of one of the great things, I guess, about cannabis being legalized is that information is available to you. When someone buys online or at a cannabis store, you can see right in front of you, it tells you what is the breakdown of THC in this product. So I know what I'm getting. With cannabis edibles, start low and go slow. They do take much longer to kick in when you smoke because of the absorption through your lungs. Like it happens very quickly and gets into your bloodstream. As Brittany mentioned earlier, you're digesting it, so it's going, it takes a lot longer to get into your bloodstream. So you might not feel the effects. And a lot of people think, oh, I didn't eat enough, I don't feel anything. and then eat more, and then end up having kind of an adverse effect or a type of overdose where they're extremely intoxicated from the edibles and don't necessarily enjoy their experience. And at that point, you have to wait quite a while, right? As we mentioned, that the effects do last a long time too. So something to think about, that you won't be able to stop those feelings very quickly. Only use cannabis products purchased legally, as I mentioned. And consider tracking or monitoring your use to understand your use pattern and when it may be affecting your daily life or becomes hard to control. And that's a conversation I often have with youth is if they don't see their cannabis use as a problem yet, how would you know? What would be a sign to you that it is becoming a problem, or maybe I need to sit back and kind of think about it. Maybe it is causing me issues. What would kind of signal to you that cannabis is having an impact on my life? So as we're saying that, how would we see that in someone else? As these workshops are trying to target, both youth and the people in their community who, support them or have relationships with them, how would we know if a youth or if a friend had a problem? So often people who have problem use or experiencing problem use use in larger amounts or for longer periods of time than intended. So, maybe my friend got high on the weekend and that was okay. Maybe I used with them, but then, Monday morning they get off the bus and the first thing they need to do is get high. And then at lunch, they said we were going to go, play basketball in the gym, but now instead they've made plans to go get high with someone else. So it wasn't something that they had planned, but it seems like now they're unable to stop or they need it. So using it for longer than intended, which is linked to that inability to cut down or quit. Maybe my parents have said, if I don't cut back, then I'm going to have my cell phone taken away. They know that I'm using every day and I need to stop going to school high, or they're taking my phone. And so even though I know, and for a lot of youth, having a phone is a pretty important thing these days. So I'm still unable to quit, even though I know that there's a negative consequence that I don't want to deal with. I'm still not able to stop doing it. So using drugs in unsafe situations. So maybe I'm going places with people I don't know. Maybe I'm getting so high and trying, different types of, not different types of cannabis, but using cannabis in its different forms. So like maybe I'm trying shatter with, people I don't know, and in places that no one could really get to me, or maybe people don't even know where I am if I needed help. So those types of things. Again, problems at home, school, and friends due to drug use. That's a pretty a big sign, I would say, is usually someone around the person has noticed something at some point, right? So whether it's a friend, whether it's a teacher, a parent, a sibling, someone will have identified that there's an issue and probably confronted them. So that can be a sign, I had the example here, my parents kicked me out because I won't stop smoking weed. It could be, I'm not hanging out with so-and-so anymore because they tried to tell me that they think I'm addicted to weed, and I think that's ridiculous. well, that might be a sign that there is something going on, right? Oh, sorry about that. Loss of interest in activities previously enjoyed. So yeah, no longer doing anything else. You know, a lot of your time becomes devoted to using instead of other activities. Change in friend groups. Sometimes if your friends don't accept your level of use, you're going to gravitate towards people that will. So moving away from people, you know, who are doing other activities and maybe coping in other ways, and moving towards people that are using more, and that's kind of how they're what's the word I'm looking for, not recreation, but their lives kind of more revolve around it. And then serious and confusing personality changes. So mood changes do happen with cannabis use, especially, you know, in between times of use. You can become very irritable, angry, very anxious. So noticing things like that, you know, when the person's not high, they act in kind of extreme ways that weren't there before. So what can you do? I mean, the first thing is acknowledging that it's never easy for anyone to admit they have a drug problem. So going into it, knowing that you are going to have to be patient, you're going to have to allow your friend or the youth some space to kind of come to see the problem for themselves. Your friend may not be ready to talk about it. As I, you know, used as the last example, your friend may become angry with you if you try to point out that there's some signs it might be a problem. And so trying not to take that personally, you know, and engaging in that negative interaction, but maybe allowing them some space to think about it and reapproaching them at a different time. When you do approach them, letting them know you're concerned about them. You know, using I statements, not blaming them for what they're doing, but saying, you know, I feel worried when you know, skip school to go smoke weed with those people that we don't really know. You know, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do if you don't come back or that type of thing, like letting them know how it impacts you, and not saying things like that are judgmental towards them, like making them feel bad for their decision making. So telling them they're a bad person or they're an idiot for what they're doing. It's not that you don't care about them, it's that you don't care for what they're doing. You don't think what they're doing is healthy and helpful for them. Offer a listening ear when they need support. So letting them know you care about them and they're not alone. And that kind of all ties into the last couple is maybe there's something else going on, right? Maybe there's a reason that they've been using more or, you know, have developed a problem. So giving them that outlet for support if maybe they just need to talk to someone and they haven't been able to do that. Give them the information on where they can get help if they want it. Again, we can't force anyone to get help or want to make changes. We can tell them, you know, our concerns. Like I said, be supportive, but it's ultimately with the individual that's using substances to seek out help, and that does count for youth. Even as a parent or guardian, there's not really any there's nothing that you can force a youth to engage in terms of addiction treatment. It's voluntary. So we can offer to go with them, offer to make the first phone call with them, you know, if it's scary for them, you know, kind of encourage them that it does take a lot of courage, and we're really proud of them for taking those steps, and we're going to be there to support them through what comes out of it, right? Because it's often not just going to be that first phone call. It's going to be a scary journey ahead of trying to make changes. Even if they don't want to get ready, or they don't want to get professional help, encourage them to talk to anyone. So I'll just flip to the next slide. There's lots of support services in the community. Albeit with COVID, things are, you know, obviously a little bit trickier, but, you know, even starting with a guidance counselor or a teacher at school that you trust, just starting that conversation and opening up to someone, it's a first step. Maybe it's even like a friend's parent, right? Because often I would say youth aren't necessarily always open to talking to their own parents about it, but it might be another adult in their life. So somebody that can listen and be supportive in a different way than a friend. So yeah, some of the services that are available, like I mentioned, the guidance counselors at school, the public high schools all have, and elementary schools, have student success and attendance counselors. They don't have that position at the Catholic schools, but yeah, the SSACs are a resource in the public school system. There is the mental health and addictions nurse who also works in the high schools. Addiction counselors, so through CMHA, we have 2 dedicated counselors that work with elementary aged youth, and then 2 counselors who work with kind of secondary school to, you know, into the 20s age group. So those are people that are available, and they do attend the schools when they're open, but we do have connections with the schools, so can be reached that way too. Mind Aid, which is a mental health navigation program that's kind of new in the area, but they're a resource that you could start with. Children's Mental Health, they run through Family Connections and have a number of ways you can connect with them, again, through the schools. They have a walk-in clinic that I'm not sure if it's running right now, but I know they have some online opportunities as available, and you can still call them at any point to get the information. They have a crisis line as well, the Child and Youth Crisis Line, and then the Kids Help Phone. So even if someone just wanted to talk initially and maybe just have, you know, someone who doesn't know them listen for a few minutes and kind of give their own feedback about what might be helpful for them, that's an option too. Okay, so that is kind of all we had for today, and have time for questions if there are any. I'm going to try and minimize this, so you won't be able to see the slide anymore, but I'll be able to see if any questions come up.
Did you want to try the video, Cass?
Oh, yes.
Thanks, Natasha.
Okay.
I think you have to stop sharing and then go to the video and share
Yeah, I can't even get Chrome open right now.
Okay.
I don't know what's going on with my computer.
Well, thank you, Cass and Brittany. Were there any questions from any of the attendees?
I'm going to show a video. That's all I see.
So I think if we're not able to get the video up and running, it will be a part of the GAP website. And hopefully the play will work when you are viewing it from the website. We can attach that video, I'm sure, in another tab.
Sounds good.
Well, thank you so much for being willing to be the presenters for our first Real Talk. We hope that the attendees, you share it with your community, and we will be back next month with another Real Talk presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.